Hey, how you doing?
I'm good. Are you Taye? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yes, yes. Nice to
Okay.
meet you.
Nice to meet you too. What brought me to your attention?
Well, I mean, you're doing some amazing work, so I definitely would like to hear more about it. The book, your work at the museum, and future projects as well. And for the viewers who may not recognize you, let them know what your name is and definitely where you're from.
Okay, my name is Elizabeth White, but I've always been called Barry. Southern King, um, from Southern Virginia. I live in Falls Church, Virginia. I'm a historian. I have a PhD in modern Europe and Latin American history with a specialty in German history. And I spent my career at the U.S. Justice Department working on investigations and prosecutions, originally of people who were involved in Nazi crimes and then immigrated to the U.S. And then that expanded eventually to human rights violators from all over the world. And after I retired from justice, I went to the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, first as the research director of its Center for the Prevention of Genocide, and then in the last few years before I retired, 2 years ago, I was an expert for all of the museum on the Holocaust, post-Holocaust genocides, and international justice.
Wow. Okay. Okay. That's really amazing. Now I would like to know this. When did you develop this passion for history?
Oh, good question. Not in high school. Growing up in Virginia, history was just, all these dubious facts and dates, and all about how great Virginia was. And so I did not think history was at all interesting. But I was very interested in languages and European culture and thought. And so at college, I had to take a Western Civ course, and it hit me then that history was actually all of these things that I was interested in, and that my language skills, made that accessible to me. Um, so that's, and I actually did an independent major that combined German and Russian history in college. But my mentor was a history professor, and he urged me to go to graduate school in history.
Wow. Okay. Okay. That's amazing because a lot of people, I don't know, they may find history boring sometimes, but it can be very empowering and rewarding, and you can learn so much. And obviously, you've made an excellent career out of it. So, I really appreciate you sharing that. And
I was very lucky.
yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, you're doing some great work. Now, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about your work with the U.S. Department of Justice. You spoke about Nazi criminals. What exactly is a Nazi criminal? Is everybody that was in the German army considered a Nazi, or is it more to it than that?
you know, um, we actually what we were looking at was people who had ordered, incited, assisted, or otherwise participated in persecution of people on the basis of race, religion, national origin, or political belief on behalf of Nazi Germany or its allies. And most of the vast majority of the subjects of our cases in the United States were not German. They've never been Nazis. But they were people who made it possible for Nazi Germany to commit its crimes. Who, you know, they were in a lot of cases, the hands-on people.
Okay, thank you for clearing that up. Now, I guess I can ask you this: were there a specific number of people that y'all might have been looking for, or did you just kind of find them as you go?
Um, yeah, that's a great question. So it started out, I mean, for 30 years after the war, the U.S. did almost nothing. There were a lot of problems with trying to go after people who came here who had been involved in crimes. Those crimes aren't under the jurisdiction of U.S. courts. So the only thing the government could seek to do would be to get them out of the country, by removing them for immigration violations. And But it wasn't clear that what they had done violated immigration regulations, except that many of them came under specific refugee programs that specifically barred people who were involved in persecution. So that was the focus. There, and then the government was not effective. The cases were investigated by local offices of the U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service and prosecuted by local U.S. attorneys, and they just didn't have, the resources and the knowledge necessary to pursue investigations of crimes committed in most cases in Eastern Europe, which was then behind the Iron Curtain during the Cold War. So the government had a miserable record, and that became something of a scandal in the 1970s. And there was a lot of press coverage and people coming forward and accusing this person and that person. So the Office of Special Investigations in the Justice Department was only created in 1979 with the responsibility for investigating and bringing action against people involved in Nazi persecution. And so it inherited a couple hundred cases of accusations at that point. And it really wasn't expected to have much success or to last for very long. And it started out with the typical law enforcement approach of you had criminal investigators and prosecutors, and they were looking to the countries where the crimes were committed to provide the evidence needed to bring the cases. But those countries were communist countries, so that was a lot of judges were very hesitant or refused to credit evidence that was supplied, and particularly witnesses that were supplied by the Soviet Union or other communist countries. And so the office hired a couple of historians whose job it was to find evidence in Western Europe that would help corroborate with the evidence that was coming from behind the Iron Curtain. But then it turned out those historians were able to come up with evidence that enabled OSI, the office, to prosecute successful cases without relying on Soviet evidence. And the historians basically became the investigators for the office over time. So, and the main engine of finding new cases became the research of the historians. So as the historians were doing research, they were collecting records about different units that were involved in persecution. An easy example would be a roster of concentration camp guards that included the person that we were investigating, but then you had all of these names of these other people who served at the camp. And so we would process those and see, did any of those people come to the U.S. and can we find them now? And that was actually my job for a number of years. I ran that, what we call the R&D program, which after about 1988 generated all of the office's cases. And the office was far more successful than anybody expected. I think the total number was 109 successful cases.
Wow. Okay, that's great. That's great. I appreciate you sharing that. And like I said before, a lot of people we may, I don't know, take it for granted. We think of a historian as a person who maybe just write a book, but like you say, you did so much investigating and covered things that affected so many people's lives, and I'm sure they was very thankful for the work that y'all was doing.
I was really lucky to have work to do that I believed in, and I worked alongside very smart and capable and dedicated people, and I got to play a key role in the success of the office.
Yeah. Now, can I ask you this? Now, as a historian, what are your thoughts on the new technology, AI, social media, all these different things have their has it been the easy or difficult transition for you to use those things, and have they been, more efficient in helping you do your job?
Uh, I mean, the internet definitely has been very helpful. And it's, the digitization of records made it possible uh, to access far more information, far more, much more easily. Instead of having to go off to an archive in Dnipropetrovsk or something like that, you can get the records online. Or particularly the collection of records at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum has the largest collection of Holocaust-related records in the world. And so, for us, when I was at Justice, we could just go a few blocks away to the museum and do the research there. And now a lot of their records are digitized too. So that's been, that technology has helped tremendously in that. Um, I haven't been involved in the investigation since, so I left Justice in 2012, 2013. So I don't know whether social media is of help at all. I imagine it's something we check. Um, Artificial intelligence, no, I have not used it.
Okay, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about your work with the Holocaust Memorial Museum, if you could speak about that, because I read some things where you were calling attention to things that were going on in different countries.
Yes, yes. As I mentioned, I went to the Holocaust Museum originally as the research director of its Center for the Prevention of Genocide. Today it's called the Simon Scott Center for the Prevention of Genocide, which works to develop better understanding of how genocides and mass atrocities happen. What are the risk factors and the warning signs, and then what are effective policies and tools that we can develop to prevent those genocides and mass atrocities from happening, and then also educating the public and especially policymakers and getting them to take action. So those are one of the three key things, focuses. And as the research director, I was really focused on a lot on the policies and the tools. So I developed a fellowship program. Um, and so, for example, one of the things I was very involved in was looking at what we call dangerous speech, which is hate speech, but it's the kind of hate speech that can catalyze mass violence targeting a group. This hate speech happens all over the world all the time, and it very rarely leads to mass violence. So, what are the elements that kind of weaponize it? And that has a lot to do with who the speaker is, and who the audience is, and what's in that speech and how that speech is spread. For example, in media, that if you're looking at the example of Nazi Germany, it would be Nazi propaganda. The Nazi regime controlled all the press, and so they could control what information and messages people were receiving. In the case of Rwanda, where there was a genocide in the 1990s, the there was a very influential radio station run by the Tutsi regime uh, that was very influential in calling people out to commit genocide. So those are some of the different factors that go into making speech dangerous. And so what we were really looking at was that audience for dangerous speech. How do you prevent the audience from being influenced by the speech to commit violence? Uh, and I gave a fellowship to a young woman, Rachel Brown, who had been very active in Kenya in 2010, in the run-up to elections, presidential elections, it was 2012, because in the previous elections in 2008, there had been mass violence between different ethnic groups, ethnic group on ethnic group violence. And so there was a big concern about how do you prevent this from happening. And she created this kind of text message system, working with local people, identifying key people in communities who were key communicators. So not necessarily leaders, but maybe the lady who ran the kiosk at the crossroads where people would hang out and get their news, people like that, but also people that were trusted and that were interested in preventing further violence and then developing messages that would influence people. And in this kind of case, you can't just go out and say, "Oh, don't fear these people. They're good. They're kind. They're not going to hurt you." When you have experiences, sometimes generations long experiences of violence between these groups, that's not going to work. And so, how do you develop messages that will be influential with this group? In Rachel's case, in that particular environment, was reminding people of how much they lost in the violence that happened before. That violence was not in their interests. And it was rated pretty successful. So I gave her a fellowship, say, take this kind of approach and look at strategic communication strategies, and let's develop something. And so she did develop, we called it defusing hate, a strategic communication for combating, I forget the full title, sorry. It's defusing hate was the main title, and it's on the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum website if anybody's interested. But it's a guidebook, a reference book, and 3 workbooks that groups can use for really understanding the situations where they see dangerous speech potentially happening and breaking it down and drawing out scenarios about what could happen and what the consequences would be and where can you intervene in that and who do you need to be working with and what kind of messages resonate with them.
Okay, my next question, what I wanted to ask you about was your book. If you could talk about that, what inspired you to write the book, and what's the title of the book?
Yeah, okay. So I happen to have it right here. The title is The Counterfeit Countess, the Jewish woman who rescued thousands of Poles during the Holocaust. And this came about through my work for the Justice Department. In the 1980s, I was investigating concentration camp guards. And some of them had served at Majdanek, which was a major concentration camp in German-occupied Poland. It was very famous at the end of the war, and sometimes called the other Auschwitz. But in recent decades, it's kind of not that many people in the West seem to have heard of it. But I became very interested in Majdanek, and I gave a paper about it at the convention of the American Historical Association. And afterwards, this historian I didn't know came up and handed me a carbon copy manuscript on that flimsy paper and said it was the unpublished memoir of a Jewish Polish mathematician, Janina Nailberg, who had held prisoners at Majdanek while pretending to be a Polish Christian countess. And he'd been trying to get it published and no success. She had died in Chicago in 1969, so he was going to give copies to some archives, but wanted me to take this copy because he hoped I could make the story known. But I read this story, and it was so incredible that I really had to question whether it could be true. She claimed that she obtained this false identity in German-occupied Poland as the Countess Sukadolska. And she had used her status as this countess to become a prominent official of a Polish relief organization. Since she spoke fluent German, her job included negotiating with Nazi and SS officials in Lublin, Poland, for measures to aid non-Jewish Poles. And she was very active at Majdanek in particular. There she was able to persuade the SS to let her organization deliver massive quantities of food and medicines for the prisoners. She would bring these deliveries herself inside Majdanek up to 5 days a week. And this is a place where 63,000 Jews were murdered in gas chambers and shooting pits, and she knew what was happening to Jews there, right? And she didn't just bring in these deliveries, she used them as cover to smuggle messages, supplies, weapons to members of the resistance imprisoned in Majdanek, because she was also an officer in the underground Polish army. So, you know, there was a Countess Superdolska who did do relief and resistance activities at Majdanek, and she's acknowledged by former prisoners and discussed in some post-war Polish uh, scholarship. But there's no indication, that she was a Jew. So I couldn't really do anything with this without proving it, and I didn't have a way to do that then. I can run off to Poland to do research, and I don't know Polish. So I kept thinking another historian would come across it in the archives and the memoir and do the work to verify it. But that just didn't happen. It didn't happen. And I never forgot this incredible story, which really kind of haunted me, because the memoir is not just an account of these amazing things that she did, but it's very moving and inspiring because she used it to reflect on what she learned about human nature from observing it, the horrible, horrible circumstances of occupied Poland. And so I started wondering whether I had a responsibility to it. In 2017, I was at the Holocaust, working at the Holocaust Museum, and decided to use its resources to start looking into who this person really was. And I found just enough to make me think that she might have been this countess. And that's when I got connected with Joanna Sliwa, who is the co-author of the book. She is an expert on the Holocaust in Poland, is Polish. Uh, and so she agreed to partner with me in investigating the meaning of Melbert's life. And we not only confirmed the memoir, we found out that she accomplished a lot more than she even claimed. For example, just based on wartime German records, we discovered that she negotiated the release of more than 9,700 Poles from German captivity. Uh, there's no mention of this in her memoir, and other amazing things. And then she had a really remarkable life before and after the war. She had a PhD, she was a mathematician. She ended up in the United States in the 1960s as a tenured full professor of mathematics at the Illinois Institute of Technology. So we have written her biography, but using her memoirs, and that makes it possible for us to tell a lot of her story from her perspective. There's so many amazing, riveting scenes in the memoir that we incorporate into the book, and conversations that she had. So we were very clear, both of us are very inspired by her memoir, and so we did not want to produce an academic work. We wanted to produce a work that would be accessible to a broader readership. And Simon & Schuster thought it was a good project, so we published it in 2024. And it's out in Slovakian, Russian, Italian, Finnish, and it's coming out in Polish in the fall.
Okay, that's amazing. That's truly inspiring. Now, how long did it take from the time that you discovered this story to 2024?
Well, I was given a memoir in 1989, but I really started working on it in 2017. And then we turned in the manuscript on September 1st, 2022. So 5 years.
Wow. Okay. Now it sounds very, very interesting. Have you thought about maybe doing a documentary or even like a screenplay or a movie or anything like that?
Yeah, so lots of people who've read the book or hear about it say, oh, this needs to be a movie. And we have agents, but we haven't received any serious offers. I think a documentary would be hard because of the lack of, there are some photos in the book, and we have a number of photos, but very little from the actual wartime. So no photos of that, of when she was Countess of Nebraska.
Okay. Well, we're about 28 minutes in. I want to thank you again so much for taking out the time to stop by on my platform. You're doing some amazing work, as I said before, and I definitely look forward to the work that you have coming in the future. And I'm sure the viewers will check out the book as well.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me.
Definitely, it's an honor.